Hi, my name is Kanal, and welcome to the Geeks of the Valley podcast, which connects with some of the brightest minds globally who are leading their respective industries today to discuss the hottest upcoming industry trends and how their work is affecting the global economy. What started off as a coffee chat has now grown into a global platform for visionaries. This morning from Singapore, we have the ex VP of Growth and Operations at CoinMarketCap and the current head of Spartan Labs joining us. Please welcome Shaun Heng. Shaun, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kunal. Pleasure to be here.
So, Shaun, let's jump into the first question here, shall we?
Sure.
Tell me about yourself and your background and how it led you to the path of becoming the head of Spartan Labs.
Sure. So I started my career in investment banking back in 2013, and very soon after that short stint in banking, I went on to RedMart, an online grocery company, to lead corporate development for them. So there was that point where I saw what's happening with the whole startup ecosystem, fell in love with entrepreneurship, stayed there for 2 years, helped them with their capital raising and the eventual acquisition by Lazada, and very incidentally went into entrepreneurship in 2016. So ran my own company for about 3 years, grew it to about a Series A company, and right before COVID, had to shut it down for different reasons, but learned a ton from that experience. And for the next 2 years after that, I led growth and operations at CoinMarketCap. And more recently, I think having been through the entire entrepreneurship operator route, decided to take on a new journey to lead a venture studio model at Spartan, one of the leading crypto investment advisory firm based in Singapore and Hong Kong, to build up the entire $100 million venture studio part of the business. Yeah.
So, as you just alluded to, Spartan Labs is a $100 million Web 3.0 venture building studio.
It is correct.
What are you trying to accomplish with Spartan Labs?
I think what we notice in the industry is that there's a lot of capital, a lot of fun investing into the different projects in the crypto space, but there's not enough high quality, I would say, builders in the space, given the space is just evolving and moving so quickly, right? So I think what we want to do at Spartan Labs is also to take on a more, I would say, methodical approach towards venture building. Knowing what we know within the space itself, given our experience in the advisory arm, given our experience in the investment arm, and really looked at the different problems that needs to be solved within the space. And with the full stack team that we are building within the venture studio model itself, we want to be able to build a lot more high quality projects that could be spun out of Spartan Labs and go on to make an impact in the whole Web3 ecosystem itself. So I think the goal really is to look at what's, really to ask a bunch of questions around, what problems are we actually solving in the space itself, and not just be building projects or products in the space based on what we know, but really looked at it from a much larger ecosystem perspective and build more meaningful products within the ecosystem itself.
And with Spartan Labs, how do you plan on enabling individuals to experiment more in the Web 3.0 space?
I think the way we sort of think about this, there are really it's more of like a two-pronged attack, right? So on one hand, we will be building a lot more, I would say, internal idea incubation, right? So generating internal theses from our own research arm in terms of what needs to be built within the space itself, and building up their internal capabilities within the team of full stack engineers, product managers, designers, marketers. And I think that's really where we allow a very specialized group of people within labs to experiment and build different products that we have a lot more high conviction in. So I think that's really the first vertical that we are focusing on right now. And on the other hand, I think once we have sort of built up that internal capabilities within the team, we will be able to start opening up that funnel to allow more, I'll say, external entrepreneurs, right? People who have an idea, have a very strong sort of Web2 operating background, but may not have the necessary know-hows in terms of understanding or building in Web3, and we provide the necessary infrastructure in terms of tokenomics understanding, building smart contracts, understanding how to build communities and all the Web3 related stuff, right? And sort of impart this know-how to them, such that they are able to then take on this know-hows and accelerate their business model on the ideas that they are working on. So I think it's really about allowing different groups of people who have different sort of needs and wants, right? People who are a bit more entrepreneurial to build businesses, or even people who are a bit more focused on like operating to take and scale businesses that we have a lot more high conviction in.
And speaking of these business models and startups, how many do you hope to build and push out this coming year for 2022, 2023?
Great question. I think for us, the more we dig into this venture studio model, the more it became apparent to us that it's really about building up a process that allows us to take ideas from anywhere. It could be internal ideas, it could be through a hackathon, it could be through customer requests and stuff, and pass it through a funnel, right? So it's really a very process-driven approach towards venture building that we are taking. So to sort of answer your question, I think we have an internal goal that we want to be able to launch 6, 7 high-quality products or projects into the space in the next year or so. But if you sort of think about this and we extrapolate it, how do we then scale that 6 to 7 high-quality projects into 10, 12 different ideas, in the next 2 years or 3 years and so on and so forth, right? Because there's so many different problems, there's so many different ideas that we can work on. So it's really about getting all these different ideas and problems to be solved down a funnel, and leveraging on the internal capabilities of the full stack team that we have built out so far to really work and build on these different ideas. So I think it's really about thinking from a much more long-term basis and like, okay, how do I actually adapt and scale a venture building model, right? And so it's really all about the process at the end of the day, because ideas can come from anywhere. And I think for us, it's really about how do we then take on these ideas and build on these products in a much more efficient, in a much more scalable manner.
So efficient, scalable, and structured.
It is. And maybe to add another point, it's probably to minimize the failure rates of products, right? Because I think if you kind of think about the whole entrepreneurship journey by itself, the chance of failure is very high. And for us, I think we are a lot more forgiving towards failure, because the point is just to be testing, iterating, and scraping different ideas throughout the entire process itself. And to a point where, some ideas, it could just be a wrong timing, right? That the product shouldn't be launched, from a timing perspective. And when can we relaunch it? When we see that the market sentiment, the market timing is correct. So I think given that we have that kind of capital to deploy, we're able to very sequentially, push out different products at the right timing to the market, and really time that market in a sense.
How would you define timing?
Sure. So I think if you kind of think about timing, and this is something that perhaps many entrepreneurs or a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate the impact of timing to a market, right? I mean, if you launch like a Deliveroo or a Grab, 10 years ago, infrastructures are not ready yet. Or I'll say maybe even 20 years ago, right? Infrastructures are not ready yet. There wasn't smartphones and stuff. So I think that's really more of like what I meant by timing, right? Where, in a lack of better words, like where all the different stars align, and for a product to be launched at that point in time, it's probably a lot better than it being launched 10, 15 years ago. So I think going back to your question around, given what's happening with the whole Luna incident, I think there's a lot more questions being asked around algorithmic, stable coins. There's a lot more questions being asked around governance. There's also a lot more questions being asked around the dependence of like the whole curve pool on the whole stablecoin ecosystem itself. So these are all questions that we want to look at, we want to think about, and ask more meaningful questions around, knowing what we know at this point in time. What could we have done differently, right? How could we have, in other sense, perhaps build a much more dependable algorithm around the stablecoin ecosystem itself. I mean, these are questions that we don't have the answer to at this point, but again, these are questions worth asking, right? If you want to sort of push that industry forward. So whatever that happened, sort of open up the doors for us to ask more questions around what does it take to build algorithmic stablecoins? Are all algorithmic stablecoins bound to fail? I don't think so. I just think that we haven't seen the right sort of use case, and perhaps it's on us also at Spartan Labs to kind of take on that responsibility to, or take on that challenge to kind of build something in the ecosystem itself that we deem to be a much more sustainable version of the stablecoin ecosystem. But I mean, not that we are trying to, not that I'm trying to say that I'm going to do it, but I think these are questions that me and the internal team are asking right now. And if we find that we are the best person for it, we can go for it and we can try to attempt to build it. If we find like there are companies out there who are doing it and they are the best, people to kind of scale that, then we could back them up as well.
So speaking of algorithmic stablecoins, with what's happened with Luna recently and this whole market crash, would you say in a sense this is good because it's a stabilization or a recalibration of the crypto market?
I think it does to a certain extent, right? I mean, from what we are looking at the space itself, obviously there's a more systemic sort of impact across the entire crypto space itself with the crash of the whole Luna ecosystem. But at the same time, we see that those who left the ecosystem are probably those who came in maybe a year back and don't have the necessary conviction yet of like what the potential of the whole crypto space can bring to the whole industry itself. So I think there's a bit of a reset. There's a bit of that natural churn of non-believers, or I would say like the crypto cautious people. And what's left in the space are people who really believe in the impact and the potential that a decentralized future can provide to the entire, I would say, industry itself. And so I would say this kind of reset is actually healthy for, or this kind of market correction is actually healthy for the broader ecosystem. And what we're also noticing is that there's actually a lot more, I would say, what I'm more bullish on is actually a lot more smart capital, right? Or people, talented individuals, talented operators, talented entrepreneurs who are actually coming into space a lot more rapidly over the past 6 to 12 months. I think these people will be the one who solve and will be able to try cracking and solving some of the problems that has remained unanswered in the space itself. And they have sort of, and then bring their Web2 playbooks, their Web2 know-hows to kind of create better products, better experiences, better user experience for the entire crypto space itself. I think that's something that I'm very, very bullish on. And I think we're seeing a lot more of these entrepreneurs coming in.
So in a sense, this market correction has really cut out the fluff, but really enabled these Web 3.0 builders during a time like this.
Yeah, I think you can say that. I mean, with every crashes, I mean, every few, I would say, years and months, there'll be some, crypto correction. And I think with this correction, there'll be a natural, attrition of like, a churn of users. So I think it's just a very cyclical thing or cyclical thing to that happens with the whole space itself. But I think more so in a past 6 to 12 months, we are seeing a lot more strong Web2 operators coming in. And I think that's where, these guys are the ones who have built like the best marketplaces of the world, the best, payment companies, the best fintechs of the world, and them coming in to sort of take a much more methodical approach or a much stronger playbook towards building some of the financial infrastructures that we are sort of deploying in the space itself. I think that would be a sort of a good news for the whole industry as a whole.
So Shaun, taking a step back and looking at Asia Pacific as a whole, how is the Web 3.0 landscape distributed? Are there any major shifts going on?
I think at least if we looked at the past 12 to 18 months, there's a lot more focus on entrepreneurs and builders in the Asia landscape. And that's primarily because of I would say the emergence of the whole metaverse and play to earn ecosystem. I mean, Axie Infinity, for example, a Vietnamese gaming company, sort of kickstart the entire Asia crypto boom, right? And that sort of impact was extended throughout Southeast Asia, from Vietnam to the Philippines to Indonesia. So I think there's a lot more attention being paid to companies building in Asia, and the broader Asia Pacific per se. But at the same time, I think there's still a lot more know-hows that are being stuck in the US that hasn't been sort of transferred over yet. I think a lot more companies that are building in this part of the world are predominantly your, I would say, your gaming and your metaverses sort of companies. But when you look at the broader infrastructure plays, I think most of them are still centralized or located in the US.
And in your opinion, you had just recently alluded to this in the call. How can a Web 2.0 entrepreneur land an opportunity within the Web 3.0 space? Is the barrier of entry difficult to overcome?
I think this is a topic that I'm very, very passionate about, because me coming from a Web 2 space, it's not that straightforward to say, hey, I want to break into the Web 3 space and I could just leverage off my CV to do that. I think a lot of people who are in the Web 2 space are stuck with the mindset that, with their CV, they can probably, transition into a Web 3 company a lot easier. But that's actually not the case, because of the fact that Web 3 is such a global phenomenon. Anyone who is passionate, who can contribute to the space, be it you have a degree, be it you have credentials in a bank or in a fintech company or in an e-commerce company, you don't need any of those credentials as long as you can show that you can contribute to a certain protocol or to a certain company. So I think that's where Web 2 entrepreneurs are facing a bit of a challenge when they are being put into the same room with key contributors who have been following a particular protocol, a particular company, building in the Web 3 space for the longest time. Right. So I think what I always when I think about how can a Web 2 entrepreneur actually land an opportunity in Web 3, it's really about, I think the CV gets you only this far. It will get you a first round interview with the company. By the end of the day, I think it's really about how passionate you are about the space, how passionate you are about the company that you are applying for, and what have you done so far in terms of contributing to the company that you're interested in. Right. So I think that's the first point, right? About CV is probably just that first door open for you, but it really takes a lot more for you to really land a job when you are sort of put into the same room as these other contributors in the space itself. And so I think in terms of how do you actually land an opportunity, I think taking a very concentrated look at the 3 questions that I like to ask candidates, I think it will give them a very good sensing of how prepared they are to enter the Web 3 space itself, right? So I think the first question I like to ask is, tell me about your favorite degen story, right? Because this question itself would let you know how would inform the interviewer of how plugged in he or she is to the entire crypto space itself. The degen story can be about the individual himself, or it could be about a story he heard from someone else. But it's that keeps the interview informed of how plugged in this candidate is to the ecosystem. The second question is tell me your favorite NFT or GameFi project out there in the space right now. Because again, I think NFT and GameFi has only been around for the past 1 year, so 1 to 1.5 years. So I think having a good answer for that is also sort of shows the interviewer that he or she is sort of in tune with the market and not just talking about Bitcoin and Ethereum all day long, right? And the last question is tell me about a DAO that you have contributed to, and why you enjoy contributing to that DAO. Again, this question also shows the interviewer how much willingness this individual has to contribute to a DAO, to any of the communities that he or she is passionate about. So I think with these 3 sort of gating questions, you can actually get a very good sensing of how plugged in a candidate is to Web 3. And if a candidate from Web 2 has a very good answer to these 3 questions, I think he or she is really in the top 1% of candidates who would be prepared to enter the space.
So Shaun, you've had this amazing opportunity to be on both sides of the playing field. One as an investment banker, and now as an operator in the crypto industry with a leading venture capital fund. What insight does IB have that crypto does not? And why make such a jump as you work through your career life cycle?
I think in terms of insights that IB have that crypto doesn't, uh, I think it's a very difficult question to answer because again, I mean, I've been so away from the whole IB scene for about 10 years. But at the same time, I think, my experience at IB, taught me about tenacity, taught me about determination, and taught me about, working really long hours and persevering through the night. But I think that's where I feel like, what's happening to a space right now, there's a lot of people who, build a project halfway and give up, and sort of left that project in limbo, in the whims of the investors and the community, right? And I feel like that's something that maybe from a larger extent, I do wish to see more tenacity. I do wish to see more, in a way, hardcore entrepreneurs who are more determined to make something work and not just give up in the face of a new idea or a new or in the face of difficulties in that sense. So I'll say that's more from a mindset shift perspective where IB, it's known for its long hours, it's known for its 100 to 120 hours work week, right? So that kind of the kind of mental strength you need that you build throughout your career actually helps you over the next kind of career jumps that you make within the space itself. And I feel like that's something that the crypto space, it's sort of lacking a bit in terms of that tenacity, in terms of that determination, and just that raw willingness to never give up in the face of adversity. So I think that's like maybe one of those insights about IB that I feel would be good to be transferred over to the crypto space in some sense. And maybe to your question on why make such a jump, as I sort of walk through my career life cycle, I don't think any of this is sort of planned for. I think every step of the way sort of brought me closer to what I want to do, right? Which is to be building meaningful products for the space itself. So I've been a banker, I've been an operator, I've been an entrepreneur before. And the only reason why I sort of stepped away from being a pure operating role to actually right now being more of like an entrepreneur, right, where we are just building different products for the space itself, is because I feel like that really plays to my strength. And I like building products, I like building teams, I like seeing products that we build get used by the public and get feedbacks and we iterate on it. So I think that's really that kind of entrepreneurship experience that I enjoy, and I feel like that's where I perform the best. I'm also not like the best investor out there, right? So I sort of play to my strength. My way of contributing to Web3 space is more as a value creator, right? Where we create more values within the space itself, rather than me taking a more I would say investor approach towards backing other companies. I feel like for me to really understand the space and for me to really contribute to the space, I perform better as as an entrepreneur, as a builder, rather than as an investor.
And to wrap up a call with our last and final question for the day, what piece of advice would you give to the people out there from the journey you've had so far in life?
I think this goes back to actually my days at RedMart that I still hold very fond memories of, right? When I decided to leave RedMart and start my own entrepreneurship journey, I had a lot of doubts. I had a lot of reservations around whether I should start my own journey, whether I should leave my comfortable place at RedMart to start my own journey. And Roger, the CEO of RedMart at that point in time, told me, he looked at me and was like, Shaun, what's the worst can happen? And I think it was a very innocent question. It was a very simple question, but that actually got me thinking, right? I think most of the time, we tend to overthink on certain stuff. We tend to feel like we are not good enough for any situation. We tend to feel like, we need to, really evaluate the situation, 100% before we dive in. But, sometimes when we sort of ask this question to ourselves, what's the worst that can happen? The answers are actually very obvious, and more often than not, trying is better than not even attempting it. right? Because trying gets you somewhere else, and it might not be the route that you take at the end of the day, but it gets you a bit more. It gives you a bit more information, a bit more clarity towards where you intend to go towards, in your journey. So I think that's something that I feel like we should all, constantly ask ourselves. I'm not saying let's take 100% risk, right? But I'm saying let's take a bit more risk. Let's see where life takes us, and not to overthink stuff most of the time. And I think we'll be fine.
And Shaun, for people out there who are interested in catching up in person or for a cup of coffee or over a Zoom call, what would be the best point of contact?
I think there are two. One, it's you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I think you can just search for my name and you should probably see it. The other way is to connect with me on Twitter. My handle it's at Shaun Heng CJ. Should be fairly straightforward to find me on Twitter as well.
Shaun, it was a pleasure having you on Geeks of the Valley, and thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thanks, Kunal. Thanks for the invite, and very, very glad to have this conversation with you.
This podcast is brought to you by Python, an Asian-based open source enterprise software company. Python offers a suite of software applications and infrastructure services to scholars and universities.